Good day, night, evening, afternoon to you. Welcome to the new One More Word podcast, a production of GSI. Gotta say it. Back from today, I am Marvin Williams. Not that Marvin Williams, but the other Marvin Williams, joined by, as always, my buddy since November. Well, he's my student first, but my buddy in broadcasting since 2009, Mr. Matthew Aloysius Octavius Orenthal Ryan Garrett Jr., the third, the half, and 15 and a quarters.
I was wondering, is he going to pull the whole name out? Some additions there. Wow. Coming up on 11 years, over 10 years of this show, and another iteration, and once again, it's me and Marvin trying to bring sports to the cultural forefront, which has kind of been the thesis of this show since the very beginning, when we started out in a small college radio station in Manhattan Beach, Brooklyn.
Absolutely.
We used to do a Saturday morning radio show from a studio that had the decor and feel of a very itchy sweater.
I thought it was more like a Midwestern crack house. Quite frankly,
it's very nice now. They've made it very pretty now. I don't know if you've been back.
Well, no, I've not been back, but I actually saw pictures where they actually vacuumed, which was kind of great. And, I even saw, I think I saw some Windex stripes, which is pretty awesome. To know that, the windows actually did work. The very first day we were on the air, and, we're going to get into what we do for you in a minute. The very first day we were on the air, and Matthew's going to remember this well because this was his franchise, a certain wide receiver shot himself in the buttocks.
Oh my God, that was that day. That was oh my God, Plaxico Burress shooting himself literally in the foot.
Absolutely.
Oh Jesus.
And here's my memory from that day, other than the very awkward picture that I need to forward you that we took.
Oh God, no, I have that photo.
Oh, yeah. Is we were sitting there, we were looking at it, and we were kind of quasi paying attention to what was happening in the mainstream sports radio at the time, which was still relatively new in New York in terms of what we think of it now anyway. And we were both thinking, should we say this? It was you and I and Greg Benedetto. We were thinking, should we say this? Should we wait till it's confirmed? We weren't sure where to go with it. And so you know what? Heck, it's out there. It's online. It's got to be true. So let's do it. And I remember thinking, oh boy, I hope this was becoming those moments of like first and last, first time show, last time show, because of something that happened. But it was funny how that moment sort of, well, I should say not funny, haha, but how that moment sort of changed not only your franchise's history, Super Bowl champions, everybody's talking about a potential core dynasty. He was one of the most dominant receivers in the league. We're going to talk about receivers in a minute. And all of a sudden, boom, literally, gun goes off, blue, sweatpants, because everybody wears a gun with sweatpants because that's what you do.
That was the style at the time.
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, right now I'm wearing sweatpants, and I don't have my gun on me, but I think I should go get it because I feel kind of, unprepared. But it's it's weird because we see that moment happen in real time. And of course, the first thing was, we were worried about him, and we weren't sure if someone else had actually shot him. There were all these questions, as you remember, all these questions were up in the air. And, we were trying to delineate the smoke during the show because it was kind of unfurling as we were in the middle of, doing the broadcast. And, of course, we were worried about his safety and we were worried about other things. And then next thing you know, you sort of see this untoppling of the 2018 that overcame, the New England Patriots, yada, yada, blah, blah. We
came on the road and all that.
Exactly. So, but that was a moment that kicked us off in the air. So that was it's kind of a fun go back to think about when we were getting ready for this. I have pretty much every show that we were able to save. I have them on CD. So we're going to at some point I'm going to dump them down to hard drive, and I'm going to catalog them so we can give you guys some more samples of some of the stuff we got very, very right and very, very wrong.
Oh, we got a lot of things right and a lot of things wrong.
Because that's what we do. That's our superpower.
Yeah, I think we have a better. We're above the Mendoza line. So,
easy.
In terms of like the Stephen A. Smiths and the Jim Romes and all the other pontificators out there in the sports world, we're batting a pretty good average.
Well, actually, that, and we actually watch sports. But anyway, that. I probably shouldn't have said that so soon early in the broadcast. But hey, there we go.
Guns blazing, live rounds, live rounds,
downrange. So speaking of which, we just had the first major sporting event, if you want to call it that, since the lockdown of what's going on now in the nation with the COVID-19 quarantines in many states. And, for all intent and purposes, it's being received relatively well. I should say it was received relatively well. I guess I should ask, do you know what event I'm talking about?
Are you? I assume you're not talking about the NFL draft.
Absolutely not, because people. Well, I shouldn't say that, and I'm not one of these guys. But the WNBA draft was actually a little over a week ago. A little over a week ago, and it was.
Liberty got the first pick.
Liberty got the first pick. Sabrina Ionescu from Iowa, which we're going to go back to Iowa later because one of my favorite picks from this year's NFL draft is also from Iowa. But they had over 387 unique views on the first day, which was up 123% from last year. In total, they had over 6.5 million views and over 1.3 million unique minutes watched. So, we're not those people. We're going to talk about what we do because we kind of jumped into it already. We're not one of these people that's going to throw out a bunch of numbers at you. We're not going to try to bear you down under, a whole bunch of metadata because that's not what we do. And we don't think you want to hear that. There's enough people who do that. But we like to talk about what do these things really mean and where does it really come from, because that seems to be more norm of the conversation. So we understand that there's a big difference between the WNBA and the NFL. A huge difference, a huge fiscal difference, a huge social difference, on and on and on and on and on down the line. But what was interesting was to see Adam Schefter send out a tweet about the NFL being the very first sporting event since the quarantine, and to all of a sudden be kind of smacked down by saying, yes, the WNBA draft was a week ago, and the WNBA at least having enough social pull that he actually had to apologize. Now, apologies are apologies. It's what they were. It's what they are. Obviously, basketball is not his life. He wasn't paying attention to that anyway. And in this new dynamic of everybody's kind of being locked in their homes, there's this idea of I am more in control of my universe because guess what? Now I really have it all around me. I have my own fridge, my own bathroom, my own computer. Of course I have my phone. Of course I have this, I have that. So, his world is centered around the NFL draft, and I'm sure there was no other noise getting in. So, but for the fact that he realized, wow, you know what? That was a sporting misstep, and stepped up and said, you know what, dude, my bad. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. That's not what I meant. I thought that was really cool. It's come a long way from people not even knowing that the WNBA even had a draft.
Mm-hmm. And you were talking about those numbers before. That proves the viability of women's basketball, and we've seen it concurrently in terms of women's sports with the U.S. national team and the Women's World Cup. There's an international audience for this. There's a great 30 for 30 podcast about, and I'm assuming you probably listened to it or you already know the story, of Russian women's basketball in the late 1990s, early 2000s, and how it was a huge part of Russian culture and Russian life. And you hear that 1.3 million uniques, and for the WNBA, that is a huge number. But you look at the growth of the game You look at you. And this is not a knock on the WNBA, but you need to look at the growth of the WNBA the same way you look at the growth of independent or minor league baseball in the United States. Yep. Because it's built on live audience. It's built on being a line item or a secondary item of a much larger league and a much larger platform. And you know this better than anyone because you worked for a developing women's league at the same time. This is something that you're right place, right time. And I think right now is the right time for the growth of the WNBA. You're seeing more stars. You're seeing women's athletes coming to the forefront. And the most important thing, you're seeing women's voices in media really step up, especially on ESPN. You take a look at a Mina Kimes or a Katie Nolan, and you see that they're very entrenched in growing women's sports, not as a novelty, not as a gimmick, not something you see every 4 years at the Olympics or the World Cup. It is a defined part of the national narrative. And I think that over the next 4 years, you're really going to see it play at a level of maybe an NHL. I don't think it'll be at the level of the NFL and the NBA, because I'm being pragmatic. I'm not saying that they're not able. These are not high caliber athletes. Obviously they are. But I think the true bellwether for this will be Becky Hammond, and we'll get into the NFL in a second, but you'll learn really quick with this podcast. We're going to go in 19 different directions before we get to our central point, just because Marvin and I like talking to each other.
So get your popcorn ready.
But Becky Hammond as a head coach in the NBA, which is going to happen in the next year.
Yep.
Is the true bellwether for women in sports rising to the point to where a WNBA or a women's MLS.
And she's my twin, by the way. She's my twin. We have the same birthday, which is awesome. My first season tickets I ever bought was the Connecticut Sun. We would go up there all the time and find out we had the same birthday. So we had a nice little cool conversation about that. So like every time we see each other, it's like twin, 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 twin. You know, she's much better at basketball and life in general. But hey, I still claim her as my twin. And to your point about, it's something that I've argued for a long time. And for those of you who might not know me like that, I did one of my masters is in women's studies. So I dedicated an entire part of my academic career to women's studies and sort of, helping to bring out more women's voices. As the women's basketball coach at Kingsborough, my first goal at the junior college level was to find another woman to take over my job as head coach, because I thought that was a better example for what we were teaching. We weren't training people to go to the WNBA or anything like that, but I thought the example would have been better and a voice to have. And so my master's actually talks about the birth of the WNBA against the women's league that came before it. And I'm not going to bore you down with that minutia, but so this idea, what Matthew's saying about the position of the league at this time, at a great time, with the most important thing, and was a great point that Matthew said, was more women voices to bring this league up and to bring the other women leagues up and to give them attention and from the women's perspective and their view, adding to the diversity of sports makes it very, very strong. So that being said, the idea of women coaching in the NFL, which we see now too, women coaching in the NBA, which we see now too, women coaching in almost every league, I think, except I shouldn't say it, but so I won't. But I think there's one league that doesn't have a woman coach anywhere in it. But that's going to change, as you said. Over the next few years, coaching is coaching. How many people you see who don't play sports or didn't play a sport or become the head coach on a professional team?
Well, the biggest example would be the person who, is someone we're going to be talking about a lot on the show, Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick never played football at the higher level. He went to Wesleyan, which is not much like me in New York University or Hofstra University, not known for its football. And he was the son of a coach. He was an academic. He was a deep thinker, and he was able to ingratiate himself in locker rooms because he knew the game. Just because you haven't played the game, we go into this We talk about the idea of Howard Cosell and the jockocracy when you talk about broadcasting, but there's a lot of that inherent jockocracy within sports, within coaching, because a lot of people think that if you haven't played the game, you don't have an understanding or a feel for it. That is true in a certain sense, but I believe in an empirical sense, it's not. You look at some of the great coaches, or you look at some of the great general managers, not a lot of them were athletes. You look at the commissioners of every major league. Do you think David Stern was playing down at the Rucker? No. But you understand the way the game flows, or the way the industry flows, or how these identities and how these ideologies really build out. You can take someone who has a good core knowledge and you expose them into, like any other science experiment, you drop them in the environment, and you see if they can sink or swim. And now we're seeing it with female coaches. We're seeing it with female broadcasters. Like Doris Burke's one of the best broadcasters in the NBA. And she's been forever. And when we transition this into the NFL draft, when we hear these female voices, they're growing not only with authority, but they're growing their fan presence. Like, you want to hear Katie Nolan's take on the Patriots picks, or Tom Brady and Gronk going to Tampa, because they're sports personalities. So we're deeply in the personality era of sports broadcasting. We've been in that way for way before, since we started 11 years ago. But now more than ever, the idea of ESPN, the network, being bigger than the star is not necessarily true, because they have 50 stars.
Right. And you know what? Leading us into the NFL is like what you said, 50 stars. I would watch the broadcast with Beth Mowins doing the NFL announcing, because you know me, I'm a radio guy. I love radio announcers. I love listening to them talk about and bringing a game to life. You know, I might watch TV, but I'll have the radio broadcast going, and we can do that now. But I would actually watch a game and watch Beth Mowins as she was announcing and commentating on a game, because why? It was a view it was about the play. It was about what was happening. It was about what was developing. It wasn't about, well, there was this time when I played, or other things that kind of come along with that. And thank goodness a lot of broadcasts are moving away from the person who played, and they can only talk about it from their perspective. Interestingly enough, talking about the broadcast, one of the negatives that we heard about Tony Romo is he watches the game still like a quarterback. So he's talking about what's going to happen, where the zone is, and I'm sorry, I think there's a place for that. As you know, I think he has a way of speaking on the game and teaching the game and talking about it, especially with his personality, that makes it interesting. For a lot of people, it's too much. And I get that, different strokes for different folks, the whole saying, right? But, this idea of there is enough diversity and voices available now. So there's something for everybody, including if you don't want anything and just watch it with the TV muted, you can do that too. Which is how I
And there's such a great, and now with technology being the way it is, you can have multiple feeds.
Yes.
You can have not only the English and SAP version, but you could have the main version, the Nance and Romo version. You can have the more conversational Mystery Science Theater style version, and then you can have the hybrid. And I'm a big fan of the hybrid. I'm a big fan of, I've sat in broadcast booths for the past 13 years. I've commentated almost every style of sport, from MMA to pro wrestling to football. Like I did play-by-play commentary for the A7FL last season. So I have to talk about this league with you too, Marvin. We got to break that down at some point. But when you're looking at the way we intake our media, like look at the NFL draft, for instance.
Right.
how many different alternate feeds. Like I was listening to the Pat McAfee and AJ Hawk feed while watching the NFL Network simulcast of the draft, but I would be popping in every once in a while because you want to hear the Kuiper opinion, or McShay wasn't on this year, but you want to hear the McShay opinion. You want to hear the quote unquote expert opinion, but you want to hear different sides of it because we really don't know. If you're just a straight up and down NFL fan like me, and your intake of college football is bare minimum. Like, I may watch the national championship game, I'll keep track of who won the Heisman, but as someone who grew up and lives in New York City, never really had that college football connection. College basketball, something different, right. But when it comes to college football in New York, unless you're a transplant, there's no real, or you went to a college that is a Penn State or a Notre Dame, really doesn't matter. It doesn't play as big here in the city. We have the Pinstripe Bowl, but that's just for people who like going to Penn State games but don't want to leave the city.
Exactly.
You like hearing those other opinions because it helps you form, especially if you're a fan of a team, like, you don't know who this outside linebacker from Oklahoma is, but if you've got someone who's been watching nothing but tape or has played against players like that or has been his college coach, you're definitely going to want to get those opinions to help you figure out if he's a right fit for your team or not. And when it comes to sports fans, we have the highly articulate, dives deep into the stats, plays 97 different rotisserie leagues, and then we have the fan that you like to say, Marvin, has been wearing that Knicks jacket since '85, and it's because the NIC fell off.
and here's how you know we've been married too long, Matthew, because other than the outline for the show, which this is not even an outline, by the way, for our listeners, and we thank you for taking the time to listen to us right now. We're going to give you ways to reach out to us in a minute. We didn't even talk about this, but I actually have on my side note sheet North versus South, college versus pro, the conversation you just started talking about the draft. And with that, I want to give a huge shout out to a station here in Georgia, actually in the Atlanta area, 680 The Fan. There, I watched the draft the first 2 nights. They did a Zoom feed with a lot of their on-air hosts and also producers. And it was really great to see them all in one spot from different shows, bringing in their expertise on the area colleges, actually colleges around the country and the various players and things like that. And then so halfway through, I decided to sort of A/B it against what was happening with the national feed in terms of the ESPN network, et cetera. And it wasn't even close. On one side, I'm hearing the exact same thing about every single cornerback, every single wide receiver, every single quarterback. I'm hearing the exact same thing. I go back to 680 The Fan, and those guys were breaking down games and this specific situations, where they went to high school, how they were recruited, what type of player they were when they first got to college, how did they develop into what they are now. And it was just, there was so much more of that, as you put it, that information that you want to know about this person coming to a franchise, that it was really amazing. And this new technology and this new situation with how we're having to sort of reach out to each other. Matthew's in New York, I'm in Savannah, Georgia. So again, we're social distancing by thousands of miles. But we're getting, because of the internet, I can listen to New York radio stations. He can listen to Georgia radio stations, California radio stations, and the like. Okay, cool. So to actually see the difference of the way Southern sports is spoken of, and we've talked about this through many of our broadcasts, but actually getting a chance to see it side by side, picture in picture. It was such a stark difference. And I'm going to tell you, this draft to me made Mel Kiper even a larger star than what he already is. Mel Kiper was doing stuff from his basement way before the draft was this big. The NFL draft was this huge event that it is now.
Since 1982, 83.
He's calling colleges and calling high schools, begging for videotape of the videotape is something that us old people used to watch stuff on people. Videotape of these players and doing his own cut-ups and studying all these guys when no one else was even thinking about it. And so before there was all of this stuff now where they have these drops and, their mom was a farmer and their dad was an astronaut and all this stuff, he was doing that. So to me, going back to this, even though with all this technology, it just shows you how much of a rock star Mel Kiper is and how he helped create and birth the NFL draft. And I'm going to say this, if there is not a spot in the broadcasting and or NFL Hall of Fame for Mel Kiper because of what he means to the game, there is something wrong. He's my new Ray Guy because because watching this and seeing this stuff, I'm thinking, yeah, Mel did that 30 years ago. It's what's really awesome. And I'll say this, in a moment in a draft back when they started tag teaming off of the bench seat at a Madison Square Garden. Some player got drafted from a Division III JUCO school in Midwestern North Saskatchewan, Canada, or something like that, and no one even pronounced his kid's name. And all the rock stars up there, all of the ESPN heads and all the people who's supposed to know everything, basically turned at Mel and said, "You got it." And he did not skip a beat. Went on what he weighed when he was a freshman in high school to what he became as a senior, his various positions. I mean, ran it off like he was the Melopedia of the draft world. And I remember thinking, the reason I remember that moment is I stood up off the couch and put my hands there and went, that's my dude right there. It was like everyone else copies him. He is the OG when it comes to the draft, and seeing the draft being done like this actually brings it back to, if you don't do your homework, you shouldn't be at one of those desks because you say the same thing for every position, every player, and you're going to lose the person who actually might want to learn something about that actual player that you're talking about. And speaking about that on the draft, I'm sorry, Matthew, I cut you off.
No. I was going to let you rock. I was just going to say you and I, in terms of drafts and the whole concept of drafting, you and I are two intensely unique situations, because I had the luxury of living in New York City when the draft was just in New York and going to the NFL draft when it was at the theater at Madison Square Garden, when it was at the Jacob Javits Center, aka the Aaron Rodgers debacle, and at Radio City Music Hall. I've been to several drafts. I've seen first day, second day. I've waited online overnight to possibly get tickets to the NFL draft. I've fallen asleep at the NFL draft. I also almost fell asleep during the Mike and the Mad Dog reunion. Yes, Marvin, I went to that because the tickets were $10. But look, go ahead.
Look, the therapy was free.
Okay. Oh yeah, ugh, that was a copay. When you have a dynastically different experience than I.
Yeah, and it's so wonderful that you put it that way, because the reality of being a person waiting to hear that phone call, being a person actually there, or being a person hearing everybody else talk about everybody who's supposed to be there. It's just, knowing the athletes, knowing other athletes is one thing. Seeing them cold, name and number and stats on a page is something else. And in order to bring that to life, what people who are really interested in the draft, the people who talk about it, like I saw a tweet the other day, and I don't know who to attribute this to, but they actually said, is it just me, or have the Raiders always been in Las Vegas? And I thought it was pretty funny. Like, in the NFL world, the talk about the Oakland Raiders moving to Las Vegas has been a big thing for years.
Yeah, it's been a constant. Back when we were doing the show in KRB, our old radio station,
exactly,
it was a huge part of we've been talking about franchise removal for 11 years, and the Raiders franchise is this, I don't want to use bellwether again, but it is the signifier, the biggest piece of franchise removal. there were teams that moved multiple times before they even found their footing in certain cities, including the current Los Angeles Rams. They moved around 57 times. But the Raiders are the example of teams moving around, because they moved from Oakland to LA, back to Oakland, and now to Las Vegas, and they were going to possibly move back to LA. There was a lot of different things at play, and I think we're going to probably do an episode about franchise removal and franchise moving. We've got like 87 different episodes listed, so even if there's a quarantine, we got you covered for infinitum. But for people who are outside of the pro football bubble, they probably think the Raiders of being in Vegas for this entire time, because the Raiders are this larger than life franchise that fit the aesthetic of Las Vegas. And
you know, it's funny you would say that way. And I'm gonna tell you why I'm saying funny again. No matter where the Raiders are, isn't there this sort of unsaid Oakland somewhere in there?
Oh yeah.
Like, they can move to like Portland, Oregon. They'll still be the Oakland Raiders for so many people, tying them to cultures in terms of hip hop culture, tying them to the other things that the Raiders sort of represent in terms of, and I'll use the word marketing connection, for lack of a better term right now. But that idea of no matter where the Raiders are, no matter how cool for some people, wherever they might be, including Vegas, there's this sort of unheard Oakland.
Well, because if you look at the Raiders historically, going back to when a funeral home was the naming rights to their stadium, they're attached with the culture of the city they play in. When you look at Oakland, you look at even before, Pop the Trunk hip hop in the 80s and 90s, you look at the Hells Angels. And they really identified, when you look at the players on the 1970s Raiders, Villapiano, Kenny Stabler, you look at all of these different players, they're like, yep, this fits, this is branding, this is the identity, this is the style of play. It's the Hells Angels of football. Then when they moved to LA during the 1980s, the rise of gangster rap, Ice Cube repping Raider hats, the Raiders jackets, all of that being a part of the culture and the iconography. And then they moved back to Oakland a little while after MC Hammer and Too Short and the rise of the Bay Area. I'm sorry. I went, along with Stephanie Sotilli, a friend of the show on the last version of GSI, was a co-host. This is a sub-show to the greater GSI franchise. We went to the Museum of Natural History for a friend of ours was in town, and the person they were dating at the time was helping organize a tribute to Bay Area hip hop.
Oh.
In the Museum of Natural History. Now, I don't remember most of that evening, but I do remember standing on stage with Sway while Blow the Whistle was playing, and it was a good night had by all.
I'm seeing like the large woolly mammoth skeleton.
And, it was in the planetarium portion, sadly, not the room with the gigantic whale.
Right. And I'm seeing like Ice Cube like sitting on one of the ribs, with his lips poked out, his arms crossed around his chest. The places our mind goes. By the way, there's a lot of safer places to be. We'll hope you're at home and safe and enjoying everything. Please don't get into our minds, because, quite frankly, you might never get out.
It's social distance from our conscious and unconscious minds, please.
Absolutely. And with the distance, this draft, so unique in so many different ways, I believe that it is a larger hit because people are getting a chance to see these coaches, these GMs, these owners, these players. I'm going to use your natural word, in their natural habitat. Being able to really see what it's like to be drafted, see how your family is able to react. They only invite so many people each year to New York or to wherever the draft is because, they say that they know who's going to be drafted in the first round or whatever. We've seen that not happen. Everybody remembers Brady Quinn having to be, excused from the front row to the draft, I should say, to the green room, and other people who were supposedly first round surefire picks that dropped to the second round, or in some cases even later.
Geno Smith?
Yes, absolutely. So, but seeing this, yes, there were a few moments and I'll speaking from Georgia, watching Jake Fromm sort of wait, the quarterback from Georgia. He finally got drafted today. I think he got drafted by Buffalo, pick number 167. But watching him sit through those first 2 days, after all that prep of he was going to go, and he was potential first round pick. If not, he might be a third round pick, because many people don't pick quarterbacks in the second round. So this idea that, oh, you're going to go, so here's your draft, here's your Boost Mobile draft kit, and sets it up. He's sitting on the couch with his dog and his buddies and his parents, and just waiting, and then it just didn't happen. At least he wasn't in New York. At least he wasn't in Las Vegas or wherever it was. And all of a sudden it's like, what, hey, my man, why aren't you going to come and sit in the green room? Don't worry about coming in today. You still got a fully paid trip to wherever the draft was held. But, those moments sort of tag along with these players. Whereas I think now the fact, who will care if he's starting somewhere in 3 or 4 years that he dropped so much? I mean, it's going to be a side note.
Yeah.
So I think this new draft model allows for more natural interaction, a safer interaction, and hopefully they can continue this and marry it to that in-person experience that you've had.
Yeah.
That been able to go there and wear the jerseys and boo the commissioner and the whole nine. Hopefully they can marry these two experiences to even make it a better product. Interesting to hear how people talk about where people get drafted and how how people lose draft capital because of one thing or another. And hello, our old phrase, we got to say it, the name of the larger franchise, right? You don't know. When you draft a player and you bring them in, you're drafting on coachability, potential, and all these other things, but you don't know until they actually hit the field what's going to happen. And so, to see franchises fans of franchises anyway, kind of lose their mind about who's available, who's not available, what's going on, what is this, it's really amazing. After all these years, everybody is either underwhelmed by the pick or overwhelmed by the pick, but nobody is just whelmed. Everybody's like, oh, that's a great pick. I'm so excited. Oh man, that pick sucked. No one says that was a perfect pick. No one says that anymore. It's like you have to be one extreme of the cheese sandwich or the other.
For me, as a New York Football Giants fan and a Las Vegas Raiders fan, it only matters depending upon how high my team is picking in the draft and the dire needs of the team in the draft. Like I have people that I talk to that are Giants fans that were talking about drafting a quarterback in the first round, and I look at them like a dog that was just shown a card trick, and I'm like, they just did that. They drafted Daniel Jones 2 years ago, a year ago, and then a year before that, they drafted Saquon Barkley. I don't understand why you don't draft the best player possible. If you're a team like that, you draft the best possible asset you can add to your team. Right. The draft is supposed to be a supplement to your franchise. For certain teams like the Cincinnati Bengals, if they're looking to get rid of Andy Dalton and they're looking to reboot their franchise, Joe Burrow, obviously the choice.
Right.
But draft picks are collateral. They are a commodity. They are not this thing they're not going to make or break every franchise. Draft picks are not going to make or break every franchise. They are additions to the team that you cannot develop within free agency. And if you look at drafting since the inception of the league, it started out as ways to supplement your team from the college ranks, and it grew into this from the selection meeting into this overarching thing. And at varying points in history, the draft was very important because there were rival leagues. There was the AAFC or the different AFLs or the USFL. Right. And they were able to find ways to subvert the NFL system.
So for you and for our listeners, which side do you think you're on? Okay, so there's the Bob Knight scenario, right? Bobby Knight, great basketball coach, college basketball coach. And his argument, and I remember this as plain as day, which is actually good timing for it since they released this multi-part series about the Bull Dynasty and Michael Jordan. When Michael Jordan was coming out and Portland had the first pick, he kept saying
Houston had the first pick.
Oh, Houston! Thank you. Houston had the first pick. It was you should draft Michael Jordan. Well, they need a center. You should draft Michael Jordan. Whoever's at the front of the line should draft Michael Jordan. Well, but they don't need that. Now you understand. You draft the best player in the league, and then you can build around him. That was sort of his mentality about putting together a franchise or a team. Now granted, he's speaking at it from the level from the perch of a college basketball coach. When you go out and you get the very best basketball player you can get, you're not really thinking about, do I need a center? Do I need this? Do I need that? I just get the best guys who can play basketball, and I can make a team from that. And basketball is way different than football. We're going to talk about that later. But so that approach, you say, okay, no, I don't worry about getting the best athlete. I get the best asset. And here's where I think we start seeing this new dynamic, right? So you have, let's use my Jets as an example. The Jets have a relatively new coach I'm a new coach of the Jets, which the hire still baffles me as a fan. Neither here nor there, by the way. Though those of you who have heard us before, we never ask for anyone's job. We never talk about the salary. We never talk about a paycheck. We talk about the person and the position and what's going on. So, no, I'm not a fan of his, but he is my coach. He's the coach of my team, so I got to deal with it. You have him. You have a GM. We have a situation where they're sort of hobnobbling together a situation from having the Jets draft stock kind of being reassembled by a group of people before who were trying to save their jobs. And I won't say Todd Bowles because he didn't have anything in terms of do with that. But so ownership might have said, okay, guess what? We need you to perform. But we don't want you messing up and doing the Mike Ditka and trading out our draft picks for the next 7 years to draft Ricky Williams first in the draft. We want you to use what you got this year and you don't mess with next year. So now there are constrictions on how the team leadership can go about picking players. So, okay, so now do we pick what we need or do we pick the best player and make them fit? Because A, we're trying to save our job. B, we're trying to not mess with draft capital for next year. And oh, by the way, we might draft these guys and we might even be here to coach them, manage them, et cetera. So it's interesting, I guess, to go sport by sport and see how this works. For the Jets, there was a challenge of, as they did, they drafted a quarterback this year too, after drafting the franchise guy, before, just like the Giants. It's almost the same sort of move. You draft, you pick somebody for your franchise person's position, a year or 2 years later, it's no, you can never have too many quarterbacks, but there are only so many good quarterbacks to get. So how do you justify that? Now the Jets waited later, the Giants drafted early. We don't know if it's a new coach, new situation. Guess what? This guy might be the guy for now, but I need to get my guy in just in case he doesn't work out with my scheme. There are so many things going on that we can't really speak to. It's hard to say. So that mentality of position versus need kind of makes it a challenge for someone, especially especially with a 53-man roster that you're trying to build toward, to be effective for the upcoming year. The Carolina Panthers drafted all defense. Every single pick went to defense because Matt Rule, the new coach there, said, we got to fix the darn defense. I won't say the way he said it, but we got to fix the darn defense. So every single pick for Carolina was a defensive player. And Tampa Bay drafted to support Tom Brady, including trading to get Gronkowski because they're trying to support for whatever hopefully the 2 good years they can get out of Tom Brady. So, they're picking toward need. Atlanta, who I don't know what they were picking for, being in the Georgia area, hearing a lot of my Atlanta people talk about the choices that they made. A lot of people said there weren't partners for them to move up or move back in the draft. So they ended up picking someone that wasn't on the Atlanta media's radar anyway. And so there was a lot of like, meh, going on with them here, which was kind of interesting to hear from the standpoint of there is nothing about any of the Atlanta Falcon management that makes you think that they're going to make consistently great choices in the draft because so few of their top draft picks are still here. So, as a fan, what do you think? Well, most of a team's makeup comes from the later rounds anyway, or undrafted free agents. Most of the people on your franchise, if you go to your franchise's website now and look at the team roster and see where a lot of those cats come from, very few of them are first, second, or third round picks. For every first round pick you have, there's probably 8 guys who were either drafted by another team late, practice squad signee late, or free agent person late. And that is the nature of the NFL roster. So when people say, well, we should have lost more last year so we can have better picks this year. So let me get this straight. If I'm a player on a team, I'm supposed to lose, risk my job. If I'm a coach, I'm risking my job so the team can have a better pick without me next year? No, kid, I'm doing my resume. I want to win. That's why that whole losing thing makes me nuts. Because when you see this in the draft, when you see these moments in the draft, which, by the way, another cool thing about him being at these people's homes, how cool is it to see them hugging their parents, hugging their sisters, hugging so many people who wouldn't be able to be with them in New York if they were there. In this time of all times of us being locked into a situation where, we can't go to places, we can't be different, to see that family interaction so visceral and on point and just tangible is great. So great job NFL on that. And, just to leave that draft talk notice there. What I love about the later draft picks too, Matthew, is they're always more interesting guys. They're always, one guy already is in the middle of his PhD. Another guy is in the middle of med school. Another guy,
Jarvis Landry was a Rhodes Scholar, wasn't he?
Yep,
and he was going to medical school. I think he was a first or second round pick. He went to the Ravens, if I recall correctly. Wow, that recall! I can't remember what I had for breakfast on Tuesday. If I could tell you about Jarvis Landry. You're right. A lot of these guys have more interesting stories. Pat McAfee, someone who I've become a huge fan of in the sports talk world, his story about when he got drafted, he was at West Virginia. He was a kicker and a punter. And he was initially thinking he was going to go to Dallas to become a kicker, but they didn't draft him. And his family kind of just got depressed on the second day of the draft. The third day of the draft, they went to a golf course and got drunk. And then they found out that, we're going to Indianapolis. So they're dealing. That's a lot of how these families, a lot of these draft families are. They're like, you're putting yourself on, and now the draft for the past 25 years, 26 years has only been 7 rounds.
Right.
So a lot of these other players are getting unrestricted free agent deals. That's how Kurt Warner got into the league, through trips through NFL Europe and the Arena League.
Herm Edwards.
What?
Herm Edwards. Herm Edwards was not drafted. And if you haven't heard his story about being in camp, having to room in the dorm with a high draft pick that bragged about how he was a high draft pick and how Herm wasn't going to be around, blah, 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 and whatever. If you haven't heard Herm tell this story, you got to go YouTube it. And that's something else. We want our listeners to fact check us. If we missed something, you can let us know. You can reach out to us at on Twitter. Well, I should say everything is at One More Word pod.
Yep.
One more word pod. Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, and Twitter. So fact check us. If we get something, they say, hey guys, you missed this one. Trust me, we'll give you a shout out and we'll fix it right away. But YouTube, Hermed was talking about being a non-draft invitee, sleeping in the dorm. On the opposite side is a high round draft pick, and how it's getting down to the last cut day. And Herm, he said he couldn't sleep. And he hears the paper slide under the door. And you hear the paper slide under the door. Back then, it meant, you got to go see the coach tomorrow, bring your playbook. He gets up in the middle of the night. He looks at it, and it's not to him. It's to the draft pick. He said, he said, I put it back in the envelope, man. I couldn't get back into bed fast enough. And he said, I couldn't. He said, then he was so excited to sleep because he knew at that point he had made the team. So you're right. Absolutely right. There are a lot of gems that are had and found in those late rounds that are not high draft picks.
And then we could talk about the first round washouts forever. And there have been other shows who have done much deeper dives on the first round blowouts than we could, or we actually want to. But you've got to look at the draft. And I said this earlier, it will not be the be all end all of your team. No. It's the stock market. It's high risk, high reward. You look at these draft picks as commodities. They can either be on your team, or you can gamble with futures, or you can use those draft picks to pick up other players that are currently in the NFL. If you look at the draft as a commodities market, and you look and you buy and sell based upon, and it's not just position need. I talked about that earlier, but you were talking about franchise need as well. If you're a franchise in the need of a reboot, or if you have a new coach, or if you have a new defensive philosophy, if you're switching from the 4-3 to a 3-4 or a nickel defense, or if it's 1983, you're going to the 46.
What about the wing?
Or the wing. Yes, you're going to go to the wing, the 12 yards in a cloud of dust. 3 yards in a cloud of dust, pardon me. But if you're going through that direction, then if you're completely revitalizing your team, and you use the draft as that launching pad. And this year you saw it in Cincinnati with Joe Burrow. You see it with the Dolphins, who have Ryan Fitzpatrick, the guy that's been everywhere. And, he is the ultimate journeyman quarterback. He's the George Blanda of the modern era, but he can't kick.
You know something? If I was a quarterback for a franchise, the rest of the world might see Fitzpatrick as a quarterback. To any other quarterback, he must look like Michael Myers, because every team he goes to, something happens to the starting quarterback and he ends up taking over the team. So I'm sorry, if I was a quarterback, and I would keep my door locked. I would hire full-time security. I'd have cameras that follow me everywhere, because just in case something happens, I wanted evidence that this guy is a nightmare, man. Here he comes again.
He's the Black Widow.
There you go. Don't let him make your coffee, dude. Don't let him make your coffee.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine reference. I don't know if you watch that show, but he's the Vulture. He's always there
to
take the job from you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that show.
Ryan Tannehill also turning into the Vulture in Tennessee.
Oh, absolutely. Again, you have these guys who manage to stay in the league forever and manage to keep a job because A, they're smart, B, they know the routine of what need be done to move their position further. And you know what? At some degree, I guess you have to have that sort of it's about me mentality. So if you want to stay there, because if you're a backup, you're the backup. And the famous phrase, if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterback. So somebody has to be the guy or whomever, and somebody else, hey, look, you're the backup until you're not, and you always got to be ready to go. And so you see a guy like Fitzpatrick, like Tannehill, other quarterbacks who have gone from franchise to franchise to franchise to franchise, and they finally land a spot. Oh, good. They finally got their starting gig. They're finally going to make it happen. And before you know it, what? Boom. Now we know why they were a backup for so long. Mm-hmm. Or we couldn't, and speaking of which, if you get your quarterback, you've got your quarterback, you're good. But if you miss, your franchise is done. for years to come. Especially when you talk, I should say, when we talk about first round picks. When the Jets drafted Mark Sanchez, I was on record of like, what are we doing? This guy, 1 year experience. You remember this? I was like, are you serious? But I was singing his praises every single day. Anybody who bad talks Mark Sanchez, you got to go through me, because here's the reality of it. If you'd have asked me as a Jets fan, we're going to sign this guy without knowing the result, his first 2 years, you're going to the AFC Championship game, I would have finished signing my name and signing over my two daughters before you finished game. The names would have been on the sheet. I'll take it. Because they had not had that kind of success for so long with me being a fan of the franchise from the Parcells days. So, you know, we can say, oh, well, he wasn't this, he wasn't that, he wasn't whatever. Okay, fine. But guess what? We got there. And oh, by the way, somebody whose opinion I trust very much talked about the game against Pittsburgh, the second AFC Championship game, where in the second half, when the Jets almost came back and won, how he was the best player on the team. And I went back and looked at that game, and I'm going like, you know what? He actually was. So he was there when you really needed. There were just so many things around him that wasn't working. And granted, maybe he didn't get the coaching he could have gotten. Maybe there were other things involved. You know, we can talk about that ad nauseum. But the reality of it is, guess what? It doesn't matter on so many levels, especially as a quarterback, somebody who's always in the front, always in the view. Where you go matters. Mm-hmm. Because if the staff isn't prepared to support you and give you what you need to move forward, man, it's going to be a hot mess and hard sledding. And once you get drafted, Alex Smith. Once you get drafted high, Matt Leinart. Once you get picked high and it doesn't work out, Mark Sanchez. It doesn't matter where else you go. You bring that ball and chain with you.
And for every Mark Sanchez, there is an Alex Smith who flails out in one situation, but then goes to a Kansas City where he can reclaim his career. And you can see the growth, and he was able to pass that on to, you know, Patrick Mahomes, who now is you can argue the best quarterback in the NFL, but he went on, then Alex Smith went on to Washington and sadly Theismanned himself. And possibly Theismann's himself out of he could come back, but I don't think he'll be coming back in Washington because he gave that up to the younger quarterback they drafted last season.
Right.
And now there's a new coach in there too, and he's looking to define himself, Ron Rivera, who built himself up with a Dwayne Haskins-esque quarterback in Cam Newton, who's also on the market and also may just go to Washington. And Haskins may be asked out too. And when you're talking about backups before looking for their opportunities, you look at the New England Patriots, and we'll probably wrap up on this episode with this point. But for the first time in 20 years, the New England Patriots are searching for a starting quarterback. This is not the first time in 20 years that the New England Patriots have had a starting quarterback that is not Tom Brady. But throughout the 20 years that Tom Brady played for the New England Patriots, there were technically you would consider three other starters. You had Drew Bledsoe, who Wally pipped out of a gig a year later. There's Jimmy Garoppolo, and there's Matt Castle, who does not get talked about.
No.
And Matt Castle he went in for Brady when Brady got injured early in the season, I want to say 2003. And ended up playing himself into a huge money contract with the Atlanta Falcons because he was the guy that came in after Michael Vick and because of Michael Vick's situation. So this was like 2006, 2007, if I'm recalling correctly, because he came in and he replaced Mike Vick because Vick was out of the league because of his legal issues. And he completely flailed out. He led that team into obscurity, leading them to draft the other Matt Ryan, who is still in Atlanta. And Castle went off to Kansas City I believe, and he got replaced eventually by Alex Smith. And it all kind of just susses itself out. But for every Jimmy Garoppolo who went from the New England coaching tree to a better situation, all the other guys that tried to sit behind Brady, the backups, the Jason Garrett-esque backup to Tom Brady's Troy Aikman, not a lot of them measured up when it was their opportunity to play. And it's that argument that you said, these guys may be going for big money contracts or going early in the draft or going high in free agency, but they may not be going to the best situation for them.
Right. And there was someone else with the Falcons during that time in that transition period. I remember that Matt Castle did go directly from the Patriots to the Kansas City Chiefs. And why I remember that was because of Herm Edwards being with Kansas City and thinking, oh my goodness, he just finally got a quarterback, after kind of sort of having a quarterback for his time with the Jets. But that's an absolute great point. And speaking of which, I need you to do me a favor, Matt. Mm-hmm. I need you to go to Bill Belichick's house because I'm not allowed to go there anymore. and it's a long story, and eventually I get all my community service hours out of the way. But talking about this draft, right, and picking quarterbacks, needing to pick a quarterback, we know that he has this amazing library office that he always is interviewed from, right, with all the books behind him and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Did you see where his draft Boost Mobile draft kit was?
And like his dining room.
Dining room, like in that parquet table that he got from his great aunt that, probably was like, power forward for like the St. Louis Boogeyman or something like that. And it's like, dude. And every time that they would go to him, what would he do? He would stand up and walk away. It's like everyone else is being so personable and allowing people in. It's almost like he just pretty much said, you know what? I don't have Tom Brady. I'm still gonna thumbs up in your face now.
He doesn't care. Like Bill Belichick is, and this is not an insult, he is a nerd. He is a football nerd. All he cares about is coaching. All he cares about is, wearing a hoodie, going out on the field and getting the job done. And all the others,
you know where the hoodie comes from, right?
I feel like you've told me the story, but
exactly. For those Bill Belichick wanted to do I grew up. Who was my favorite coach growing up? It was Tom Landry. Where I used to wear a fake fedora and in the great island nation of Mississippi at 148 degrees, I would wear a fake. I wore my yellow raincoat like a trench coat and walked around with a notepad because I wanted to be Tom Landry growing up. So he wanted to wear a shirt and tie and kind of do like the Tom Landry thing on the sideline. NFL said, no, you need to wear logo stuff or whatever. So he said, okay, fine. He just went the whole bohemian Mike Tyson hoodie route. And you know what? You're right. And you're absolutely right. It does work for him. But guess what? If you don't maintain that level of success, whether you're being funny or not, being how he is, that's a long fall, man.
But we can have this argument of whether or not he's going to be successful without Tom Brady, or it was Brady or Belichick who caused these successes. But if you look at every franchise he's worked on, he's been a key cog in their success, in their turnaround.
Very true, very true. And that's something, and that's, that's a great call. It's a great call because people forget about him being with the Giants. People forget about him being with the Jets before. People,
or Cleveland.
Cleveland, exactly. So
if Art Modell, I'm sorry to cut you off, but if Art Modell's not an idiot and doesn't fire, if he keeps Belichick on, the Ravens may win a Super Bowl earlier than 2001 because they were on that track. Imagine Bill Belichick with Ed Reed and Ray Lewis.
And Ozzie Newsome as a general manager.
Yeah. You have Ray Lewis they drafted Ray Lewis in that draft, the 95 draft.
Who was too small, to this, to that, but he still managed to go in the first round. Imagine that.
And Tony Saragusa on the line. And you have all of these other parts and parcels. And if you have Belichick in there, you have Pepper Johnson, who was on that 94-95 team that got to the AFC title game. How are you as a franchise looking at that? And you're like, you're kicking yourself in the ass. Brian Billick's a good coach,
right?
But if you're the Ravens and you see how that team went with a defense, and the guy that got Lawrence Taylor to 2 Super Bowls, the guy that helped Willie McGinnis find himself, Ty Law, Teddy Bruschi, you're looking at that, and you're sitting here now and you're thinking, we could have had 6 Super Bowls.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? It was a great message, Samuel. It's 6-10. Who knows what could have happened then if things would have stayed on point. And, you know, speaking of 6-10, I want Cliff Kingsbury's house. That guy, what is he living like in the island of Zermathir where like all the Amazon women are? And there's great, I mean, it looks like whatever he's doing, that's where I want to be. I am not mad at anybody who looked at his house and say, that's where we want to be. And speaking of where we want to be, we thank you for listening to this segment of One More Word Pod. Again, you can follow us on Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, and the Twitter machine. And when we come back, the next episode, we're going to talk about Billick, since you brought him up, and what does he have to do with the very first flight ever taken in the world, here on One More Word Pod.